back to the channel, guys. Today I'm going to show you how to get your Intel i9-3900K to a maximum boost of 6 GHz while using Intel Thermal Velocity Boost. Now I am using the Intel 3900K, the regular Intel i9-3900K. The KS is now available, which will do this out of the box, but you'll find that generally it will do it on 3 or 4 cores at the best. Mainly 1 or 2 cores will reach that 6 GHz, but you can actually tune your CPU to reach 6 GHz on all P cores. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I'm using the Z690 Unify from MSI. I'm using 64 GB of DDR5 running at 6133 MHz, and I'm using this BIOS version, which was released on the 10th of November 2022. So I'm going to quickly show you my settings and explain how I've got this to work out. So using a P core ratio of 60, so 6 GHz, E core ratio of 46, so 4.6 GHz for the E cores, and I've got my ratio, my ring ratio at 51, which is pretty much the cache. And when it comes to my voltage, I've got this fixed, so there's no offset being used at 1.370. This is pretty high for most people, but however, it's nothing to be concerned about. What I would say is you do need some adequate cooling. What I mean by adequate is like a high-end all-in-one cooler or a custom Waterloop to use this kind of thermal velocity boost method effectively. If you've got like a 240 AIO or air cooler, just forget about it. You're not really going to be able to take too much advantage of thermal velocity boost. I've got my system agent voltage to 1.1. This may not be stable for everyone because it does kind of affect memory stability as well. So you can lower it and higher it depending on your instability. But the main setting you need to worry about is thermal velocity boost, and to get there you usually have to go to the advanced CPU configuration. I'm just going to quickly go over this because I know some motherboards don't do this by default. Power limits are important with this CPU. You really want to have the power limits fully unlocked so you can get the most out of the CPU. So your long duration power limit, your short duration power limit, and your long duration maintained, you should max these out. Your CPU current limit is kind of subjective to your own motherboard. My one does 512 as a maximum, and that is pretty much it. What you want to do now is make sure your Intel Thermal Adaptive Monitor is enabled. This will help kind of protect your CPU if it overheats. And we go into Thermal Velocity Boost Points configuration. It may be named something different depending if you're using an ASUS board or a Gigabyte board, but on MSI they call it the Thermal Velocity Boost Points configuration. So what this allows your motherboard to do is have a 3-stage kind of customization to allow your CPU to change clock speed depending on the thermal temperature. So I've got my CPU, when it's running at a ratio of 60, so 6 GHz, when the CPU is lower than 50 degrees, and this is typical for my gaming scenario. So I usually hold 6 GHz while gaming, because what that basically tells my CPU is you're not under very heavy load, and these CPUs get hot very, very quickly. Typical gaming workloads, even some of the worst engines like the Frostbite engine from EA, will use around 130 watts or lower, and most games won't come even close to that. They'll use something like 80 to 90, sometimes even lower. So if you can maintain a temperature lower than 50 degrees, you'll basically have a locked 6 GHz on your P cores while gaming. Now, if you can't hold that temperature, you can have an operation range where when you breach that 50 degree threshold, you can operate between 50 and 75 degrees, where you can then drop your offset down by 2 and go down from 60 on the ratio down to 58, which gives you a boost clock of 5.8. So 5.8 for me is when, I don't know, say I'm using something like RPCS3, like a emulator that really uses AVX2 and really pushes the chip. I may drop down to 5.8, and that's more for stability reasons, but you will find yourself fluctuating between 6 GHz and 5.8 depending on your cooling solution. At the very worst, you have a 3rd step down stage. So run my turbo ratio at 557, so 5.7 GHz if my temperature is higher than 75 degrees. Now, all of these temperatures are customizable. If you can't maintain 50 degrees, you can put it up to 60 if that's what your cooling is capable of. So under 60 degrees, I want to run my CPU at the maximum temperature or maximum boost clock. But what the problem with that is stability may creep in, because you may find that you're drawing quite a lot of power between 50 and 60 degrees. So I set it to 50 because anything that doesn't bring the CPU to 50 degrees usually is a very, very light load. So that 1.37 volt power voltage you saw me set, it's not going to be a problem. Again, 5.8 gigahertz, you're still going to need a decent cooling solution to maintain this on all P cores, but most people should be able to do this with a good AIO. At the very, very worst, when you're rendering or when you're doing some really, really like solid compression work or something that just hammers your CPU, you can drop down to 5.7, and even at 1.37 volts, you should be perfectly stable, providing your cooling is adequate enough. You can obviously tweak this to drop down to 5.6 if you want, or even lower, 5 gigahertz. You've got so much flexibility, you can put it to whatever you want. I'm just showing you how to get the most out of your chip. So there's 8 P cores of the CPU, and as you can see, I've got the same settings for every single one. 50 degrees, 6 gigahertz. Between 50 and 75 degrees, 5.8 gigahertz. Over 75 degrees, 5.7 gigahertz. What you'll find is, with my cooling solution at least, in typical gaming scenarios, you will never really breach 50 degrees while gaming for the most part, and you certainly won't breach 75. So that is all of the settings. There is one more I need to show, and I just want to show you this because this does vary from different motherboard manufacturers. I'm using a load line calibration of 3. So what this does is it will basically droop the CPU voltage depending on what you're doing. So with load line level 3, even though I've got 1.37 volts, it will use less than that for the most of the time. But there are times when it will use more, but it kind of just helps keep the CPU cool and use a little bit less power. With MSI, the higher the number, the less voltage you use. So if I put my load line calibration to say 6 and entered 1.37, I'll probably be using about 1.28 volts. So that's how it works. But with ASUS, it might be the other way around, so it will invert. So 1 will be low and 10 will be high. So you got to kind of make sure you pay attention to that. I'm not too sure what Gigabyte does as well, but everyone's different, so just be careful with that. So that's the basics. I'm just going to show you some overclock results and performance, and then you guys can compare that to Intel i9-39KS and see what do you think comes out on top. So I'm back in Windows 11, guys, and as you can see, my i9-3900K is running at 6 gigahertz across all P cores at about 1.37 volts. I've got Core temp here, so you guys can see power draw, you can see temperatures of all cores and threads, you can even see the load of all cores and threads, as well as minimum and maximum temperatures. This will always be available throughout the video, so you guys can see just how the CPU is performing. What I'm going to do now is just run the benchmark through CPU-Z. So this is version 2.030 if you want to download this and try it out yourself. And this will give you a multi-core score and a single-threaded score. So I'm going to run that now. So as you can see, I got 977 on the single core and 18,062.1 on the multi-thread score. You can actually submit this online and kind of compare your score. So if you want to kind of get a representation of how that kind of stacks up against the competition, you do have the ability to do that. So I'm going to quickly give you a quick look. So the first page will show you just how your CPU performs. So as you can see, I reached a temperature of 73 degrees. So I breached that 50 degree threshold. And that's important because you can't expect to hold 6 gigahertz on very high loads. And as you can see, that went down to 5.8. Didn't go down to 5.7, as you can see, because we didn't breach that 75 watt limit, or 75 degree limit that I set. And if you click over here, you'll then have a single threaded kind of chart. So you can see the 7950X from AMD gets around 767 as a single threaded score, and the KS Alder Lake gets 853. A stock 13900K gets 902. As you can see, my one gets 977 with the 6 gigahertz overclock, which shows you that that 6 gigahertz is actually having an impact. In terms of multi-threaded, you'll see a 7950X will get you around 15,728. A stock 3900K will get you around 16,600. And my overclocked one will get you around 18,000, so quite the step up. And this is quite impressive in terms of single-threaded and multi-threaded, so it's quite a well-balanced CPU in that regard. The only problem is it's quite power-hungry, which means you need good cooling. But so far, we've already reached a maximum of 73 degrees. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that. What I want to do is run Geekbench 5 now. Now, this is a benchmark that puts together like an office suite, so Word document, Photoshop, create content creation suites like video editing. It does a lot of things, and it just grades your CPU on it, so you can download that for free and just run that. Once it's complete, it will give you a score for your single core performance and your multi-threaded performance. So I'm going to run that now. You may have noted it said 5.5 gigahertz as a maximum frequency. That's obviously incorrect, so just ignore that. This part isn't always accurate, just so you know. Of course, I will be speeding this up for the interest of time, and really just giving you guys the results as they come in. So as you can see, I got a single score of 2,443 and a multi-score of 27,861. Usually I get 28, but sometimes that can vary a little bit. But that's okay. I'll move on to something else now. And it's just a quick test to kind of show you how things are going. We're a lot more familiar with things like Cinebench, R23 and R20. I won't run the single core scores now because that takes far too long, but I will give you a screenshot and a link in my description or comment section so you guys can check that out yourself. So if I was to run the multi-core score, or the multi-core test, should I say, or not, Cinebench R23, you can see I'm drawing way over 355 watts, which is insane. But it's what it takes to run an i9 3900K over 5.7 gigahertz on all cores. As you can see, I've breached that 75 degree threshold, and I was able to get a multi-core score of 42,857, which is seriously impressive. Completely wrecks the AMD Ryzen Threadripper 2990WX, I think it is. Just pull this across so you guys can see. Yeah, that was the WX. And I'll do R20 as well. Of course, I've got extreme cooling, so which is why I'm able to do this so comfortably. But with your AIO, you may be hitting 95, 96 degrees or more, depending on your cooling setup. So just bear that in mind. If you are not able to get these types of scores, it's because your cooling is holding you back and your thermal throttling. So I was able to score 16,417 on the multi-core, almost faster than the Intel Xeon Platinum 8168 CP. I mean, we're literally within 100 points of that. And this thing is a 48-core 96-thread CPU. So it just goes to show you how much of a multi-threaded beast the 3900K can actually be if you allow it. It's just not very efficient, that's all. What I'm going to do now, because this really is about gaming, and the benefit of the 6 gigahertz part of the settings I showed you in my BIOS is really for gaming. So I'm going to round up now by showing you a demo run, and that's going to be using, let's quickly overclock my RTX 4090 very quickly, and that's going to be using Final Fantasy Endwalker. So I'm going to be running this at 4K, and I'll be using maximum settings, and you guys can just enjoy the benchmark. You'll see clock speeds and CPU temperatures and all of the good stuff on screen. And I'm going to leave that with you guys. Hopefully this video has been helpful, and hopefully you've enjoyed the video. And as always, thanks for watching.